Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all keeping well out there, surviving all this heat. Looks like we got another couple of days of nice summer weather ahead of us, to put it mildly, but anyway, it's summer. So we're continuing on looking at the stories out of Genesis of what we would call the patriarchs. We had a couple of weeks with Abraham, and last week we looked at how Isaac, Abraham's son, and his wife Rebekah met, and today we're looking at the birth of the children of Isaac and Rebekah, which were Esau and Jacob. And Jacob, we know, became the person we call Israel. He was the one who had 12 sons, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel. But today we look at the birth of Esau and Jacob, and we get kind of a glimpse into, I don't really want to call the family dynamics, but the family politics, maybe you'd call it, around this thing of birthright, the inheritance that's passed on to the firstborn, the oldest. And of course, we know Jacob stole that from Esau, but we're going to think a little bit about that this morning and why it was. But here we go. This is chapter 25, verses 19 to 34 out of the book of Genesis. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is to be this way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red. All his body was like a hairy mantle. So they named him Esau, which, what did that mean? Just means red. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Jacob means heel grabber. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I'm famished." Therefore he was called Edom. Edom also means red. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I'd like to just catch you up on how big the family of Abraham was and how far they spread throughout the Middle East there. Well, as you know, Abraham came to the land of Canaan, believing, which is Palestine, Israel today. He was believing a promise by God to give him that land and to make his descendants to be a great nation. And he and his wife Sarah, at that time, had no children. And so they brought Abraham's nephew Lot, just in case they needed somebody to become a descendant. He would have been the closest kin. And, well, they all wandered throughout the land like nomads, and Abraham and Sarah had no children to speak of. Well, this childlessness thing threatened God's promise. How can the promise come true if there are no descendants? So Sarah, predominantly Sarah, but the two of them, Sarah and Abraham, took matters into their own hands. Sarah convinced Abraham to have a child by her Egyptian slave girl Hagar. And it was a common practice back then that when a slave girl was giving birth, ma'am would stand over her pretending to be the one giving birth so that she could call that child her own. Thusly, Ishmael became Abraham's actual firstborn son, but not a child of the promise. And this is problematic, as we'll see. Not long after that, God opened Sarah's womb, so to speak. Don't quite know how to... The childlessness, infertility thing's quite sensitive today in these stories here. It's kind of hard to know what sort of language to use. But anyway, Sarah becomes pregnant. She's in her 80s. Abraham's in his 90s. It's a miracle baby, all right? And the first and only child to Abraham and Sarah is born. This is Isaac. Isaac means laughter, because Sarah laughed when she heard the news that she was going to have a baby. Well, as you would expect, Sarah became jealous of Hagar and her son Ishmael, and certainly did not want Ishmael to receive the birthright inheritance that was due to the firstborn son, when it rightfully, she thought, should be Isaac's. So she had Abraham send them away into the wilderness, and Abraham, knowing better than to refuse Sarah, he reluctantly did so. He sent them off with only a wineskin of water and a loaf of bread, and that's going to last you a day. Well, God saw this act of injustice, if not attempted murder, and saved Hagar and Ishmael, and he promised to make a great nation with Ishmael as well. And they went and settled in what we call Saudi Arabia today, and like his half-nephew Jacob, he too had 12 sons. You may also remember Ishmaelites from another story. It was to a caravan of Ishmaelites that Jacob's sons sold their brother Joseph, and they in turn sold Joseph to Pharaoh, and then that's how the children of Jacob, the Israelites, get into Egypt and later become enslaved. It's a story for another day, but mind you, if you let your cousins get too distant, you may wind up in the slave trade together. And just saying, keep in touch with your cousins. Well, time went by and Sarah died. Not long after, Isaac and Rebekah marry, only to remain childless themselves for 20 years. Abraham, in the wake of Sarah's death, he remarried, and at the ripe young age, I should say, of more than 110, he somehow sired another batch of children. His second wife's name was Keturah, and they had 6 sons and 7 grandsons and some great-grandsons, and the great-grandsons had some whole peoples named after them. And anyway, Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac, his most favored son, who was not really his firstborn son, but firstborn son was Ishmael, but we won't talk about that. Anyway, to his other children, Keturah's children, and to the children of some concubines, he apparently had 2, he simply gave them gifts. Isaac got it all, but these other children, they just got gifts. And Abraham sent all of Keturah's children away as well. And they went east into what we would call Jordan today. It was the promised child Isaac who was to be the only one of Abraham's offspring to live on the land that God had promised to Abraham. And if you can, just imagine the expanse of it all. Abraham came to the land of Canaan childless, just he and Sarah and his nephew Lot, and then by the time Abraham dies, he's got descendants through Palestine, way over into Jordan, and all down in Saudi Arabia. And again, just please notice how Abraham sent the illicit children away, the ones not born by Sarah, how he sent them away to other lands, while he gave Isaac, the child of the promise, the promised land. You can do what you want with that, but anyway. I can't imagine the politics involved in all of that. So, that gets us to today's reading concerning the birth of Isaac and Rebekah's twin sons, the twins, Esau and Jacob, and the little problem there of the birthright that was due to the oldest son. The descendants of Abraham are a massive extended family, and as you might guess, this could prove very problematic, but interestingly, it wasn't problematic among the array of half-siblings that were spread out all over Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Palestine. And the problem with the birthright, it was just between the twins, Esau and Jacob. And this birthright matter, it's important. And it wasn't simply a matter of who gets the bulk of the inheritance and the father's blessing when the father dies. The oldest son, indeed, got the bulk of the estate, while the other sons got a pittance and daughters got nothing. And yes, there's nothing fair there. The birthright also entailed the oldest son would be the spiritual leader of the family once the father passed. And the big thing about the birthright, I guess you could say, was that the one who wields it is the one who bears the family's honor, the family reputation. You look at that oldest son. If you want to know what them, Abrahamites were like, you look at the oldest son. It was about the family name, the reputation. That's primarily the birthright. The oldest son had to live honorably, had that responsibility. And then, in the family of Abraham, that particular case was the whole promise that God made to Abraham. And we would expect that the promise that God made to Abraham to give him the land and the many descendants and make a great nation out of them and all that, we would expect that would all get passed on to the oldest son as well, and that God's promise would be fulfilled within the oldest son and the oldest son's descendants, or the oldest son of the oldest sons. Everything just keeps getting passed to the oldest son, but never mind. Anyway, reading along in this story, as it does involve the fulfillment of God's promise, we could expect that for the royal family here, things would be storybooked, Isaac and Rebekah, that things would be storybook perfect for them. Everything should be all Will and Kate for them. Not Harry and Meghan-ish. Well, it seemed to start that way. Isaac and Rebekah were a love at first sight, match made in heaven kind of couple, married for life, no polygamy or concubines. It was just the two of us, the two of them and the twins. Things should have been perfect, just like the Cleaver family from Leave It to Beaver. But it wasn't. You look at the story, there's sibling rivalry, deception, parents playing favorites, and one grand estate dispute. The only thing missing from the whole deal is a gallery of paparazzi and a tabloid. Looking at Esau and Jacob, the two of them, they must have been fraternal twins because there's nothing identical about them. Esau was biggish, hairy, and his skin tone was reddish in color. He probably would have made a good Celt or something like that. He loved to hunt. He loved to be out there in the fields. And you could say he's probably short-sighted. Lived for the moment. Couldn't see past his own belly. That's what we learned from the whole bowl of soup incident, if anything. Esau also seems to have been the more aggressive of the two brothers, an alpha-type oldest sibling. He was loud and lived for the day, we could say. And I'm stepping out on a limb. And I'm going to say that he probably wasn't someone you'd want making decisions pertaining to the future of the family business, nor the one who would give the family the best reputation out there. He likes to hunt, be in the fields, probably like to fight, all that sort of stuff. But the thing that really clues us in here is, just on top of everything about Esau's personality, whatever, he traded his birthright to his twin brother for a bowl of stew. And it just makes it seem that he just really didn't care about the role and the politics of being the oldest brother. One could argue that this stew thing was just, could argue that this stew thing was just a fake trade with, among brothers. There's no signed papers or anything. No, just, I promise, I promise. And so nothing really changed. Even if that was the case, the birthright was still a serious matter, and Esau didn't seem to care about it. And the text says he despised it. Oddly, Esau was his father's favorite. Isaac loved him because he loved the wild game that Esau hunted and cooked. Should we ask if maybe that's kind of a shallow reason? Anyway, for Jacob, on the other hand, the birthright stuff mattered. Now, we could play with sibling personality types and birth order dynamic psychology stuff. From that perspective, we could say that Jacob, being a twin, probably had the younger twin, so to speak, probably had a chip on his shoulder about being treated as the youngest sibling. They're born at the same time, really. Why does he have to be younger? He's also labeled a mama's boy, I'm sure, and a mama's boy who was sheltered and spoiled, stuff that the youngest sibling gets accused of. And all this just because he came into the world a few minutes later. In actuality, I think, Jacob was the smarter of the two brothers, the more responsible of the two, and he actually cared about the family honor and the promise. Those sort of things are characteristics that were typical of an oldest sibling in a family. Esau should have been that way. But Esau, he's this carefree, let's go hunting and camping instead of dealing with things. Let's just get out of here. He was that kind of guy. And those are personality characteristics that you would expect of the youngest sibling in the family. I think here in the stew for birthright deal, to me, it appears that Jacob is simply proving he would make the better oldest sibling in the family. He's the one more worthy of the birthright. So if we were to psychologize the whole situation here, Jacob was more like the oldest sibling in a family than Esau was. And yet here was Jacob. He's forced into the role of being the youngest sibling simply because he was born a few minutes later. it would have been a completely different world for him if he'd just come out first. And on top of it all, and I'll withhold comment on it, we have parents here playing favorites. And that never goes well. Never. There was indeed some sibling rivalry there, for sure. And I'm sure Jacob got pushed around a bit by his brutish big brother for being a mama's boy who hung around the tents with the women folk. I think things were unfair for Jacob. Now, just because Esau came out first shouldn't mean he should get the lion's share of the inheritance and bear the family honor and all that, especially when Esau really doesn't appear qualified. This is all, it's just my opinion, and with me being the youngest in my own family, it's not all that unbiased of an opinion. Anyway, I think it's very sad that Jacob gets painted in such a bad light sometimes. I'm sure we've all heard our fair share of sermons and Bible study lessons that portrayed Jacob as not just clever, but conniving, a trickster who was covetous of his brother's birthright, and he would do anything to get it. To fill the picture out a little bit more, you also know he's the one who, at his mother's behest, steals his blind father's deathbed blessing by pretending to be Esau. Isaac should have given a blessing to Isaac as the oldest son. Jacob went in with fur on his neck, smelling like the field, with a goat stew or something to give to Isaac, and Esau didn't get it. He lost the blessing. We also know the story about when Jacob goes into the far country to escape Esau's wrath. It winds up working for, he sees this girl Leah, or Rachel, falls in love and goes to the father. They work out a deal. He's supposed to work 7 years to get her hand in marriage, and so he agrees to it. And the father tricks him, gives him the older sister Leah first, and anyway, we know that story. But in the end of that story, as it all plays out, Jacob winds up getting the bulk of his father-in-law's flock through some breeding trickery, one might say. So Jacob, he knows how to play the game. But I'm not so sure about painting Jacob in such a negative light. He's not described here as being conniving or wily. The text says he was quiet and lived among the tents. And the Hebrew word there for quiet, it actually means perfect, righteous, peaceful. And I don't know why the translators use the word quiet, unless maybe they mean still, in a prayerful kind of way. And just as a point of interest, this is the word that gets used in the story of Job to describe Job's righteous character. So maybe we should consider here that there was a bit of depth, you might call spiritual depth, to Jacob. He was still. He was quiet, prayerful. He wasn't brutish, as was his brother. He stayed around the tents, as opposed to living out in the fields with the livestock. Jacob was his mother's favorite. I think because Rebekah knew that Jacob was the one to receive the birthright, the one to receive Isaac's blessing, because God had told her so before the two were born. The older would serve the younger. One can say that quite often it is the case that Mama knows best. And it was Rebekah who instigated a lot of the stuff for which Jacob gets called dishonest or conniving for. We're also safe to wager that she told her favorite son, Jacob, that God had told her while she was pregnant that there were two nations wrestling inside of her and that the older would serve the younger. You know, we call him conniving, self-seeking, a trickster, but he really wasn't. Jacob sought what God wanted for him, but what he could have been denied of simply because of birth order politics. Well, I'll wrap all this up by saying that the family of Isaac, Rebekah, and the twins Esau and Jacob, the family of the promise, was not a perfect family. And yet God worked through them. There was rivalry, deceit, favoritism, just like in any of our own families. And so we shouldn't beat ourselves up if our families are not perfect. Imperfection and brokenness aside, it was God's promise and their pursuit of it that mattered there in the family of Isaac, Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob. So it should be with us. Our families are imperfect and broken as well. But that's not what defines us. What defines us is our desire to follow Jesus and become like him. He's the firstborn Son of God who bears the honor of this big church family that's spread out all over the world. Church family that includes each of our families. It's his image that we bear, and we should all, as long as we're seeking that, we'll be all right. Don't let the blemishes outshine the glory. Amen. Well, I'll leave you with an Amy Grant song from back in the late 70s, early 80s. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet. Have a good week, and God bless you. Amen. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. When I feel afraid, I've lost my way, still you're there right beside me. And nothing will I fear as long as you are near. Please be near me to the end. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. I will not forget your love for me, and yet my heart forever is wandering. Jesus, be my guide and hold me to your side. I will will love you to the end. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path, and a light unto my path.